All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back today. We've got Mick Wallace. He's actually a member of the European Parliament. He's going to talk to us today about various topics. We're excited to have him. How are you doing today, Mick?
I'm fine. How are you?
Well, considering the state of the world, I'm getting by. I try not to look too much into things, as long as I'm living and breathing. Got music, that helps.
Yeah, I like music too.
Yeah. Well, I was preparing to talk to you by listening to the Clancy Brothers. I don't know if you know the Clancy Brothers.
Yes, I am old enough to remember the Clancy Brothers.
Yeah. Big fan of all that kind of old-timey folk music from Ireland. You guys set the bar for bluegrass and stuff in America, so we tip our hat to you. So obviously you have a pretty, what people would say controversial, but not so much for me. But what do you believe are the most pressing issues facing Europe today as somebody who's in the European Parliament?
Well, I suppose our lack of independence is probably a big problem. We're doing things that are not necessarily in the interest of the citizens of Europe, and that has to be problematic. I think it's become more obvious than ever before that the decision makers, especially at European institution level, the decision makers seem to act more in the interest of the US than they do of the European citizens. And that's very disappointing and it's very concerning for where we're going from here. But if you'd asked me the same question 20 years ago, I would have had a different perspective on it. I didn't think things were quite as bad. In fact, even a couple of years ago, I didn't think things were quite as bad. And I still wonder if Merkel had still been in power, if the war would have started with Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia. Merkel was very strong. I mightn't have liked her politics, but she was very powerful. But her decision making was very much geared towards serving the interests of the people of Germany. And she did that, I think, pretty well from a business point of view. Germany is a great country and well organized. And she was the boss for a long time. And she was a lot more interested in working with Russia than fighting with them. And she was happy to have a relationship with the Americans. But she didn't do things that were not in Germany's interest. And Germany are the biggest player by a mile in the European Parliament. We like to say that the European Parliament has kind of been run by Germany in the best interest of Germany and then of everybody else. And that's kind of been the way it's been for years. Germany's a big player. But all of a sudden, Merkel disappears, replaced by Schulz, and a three-way partnership, which hasn't been impressive. And he hasn't been strong. The Greens seem to be of almost looking the more influential of the three groups, and sadly so, because they're so pro-NATO, and they have been behaving very much like warmongers, which is really a bit scary. So we have a worrying situation in Europe, and then at institution level, I mean, we have von der Leyen, who's German. Not strong. Her politics is very poor. She's very Atlanticist. She is has unfaltering support for the Israeli program and has no sympathy whatever for the treatment of the Palestinians. And she has been a horror scene since the war started. She's also upping the ante with China. And then we have Borrell at foreign policy level. We have Michel at council level. So they're kind of the three main players at European institution level. And we would argue that it's unfortunate that we have been short on strong leadership at this particular time. We would also say at member state level, because traditionally the member states kind of dictated the foreign policy. There's efforts by the Commission in particular to kind of muscle in on that space a bit. But we don't have strong leadership among the main countries of Europe at the moment. And it's a sad reflection on Europe as a whole that Macron is actually the strongest of them, despite the fact that he's demonized at home. He's bringing in neoliberal measures that are bringing millions of protesters onto the streets. But at least when he went to China, at least he behaved himself, and he treated the Chinese with respect, whereas von der Leyen insisted on insulting them before she even left Brussels. So if we're at a place where Macron is our most impressive member state leader, we're in difficulty.
When Macron is your leading guy, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. So we're talking about Europe having sort of its own identity crisis. You know, you got these people very hardly leaning towards American imperialism and sympathy for them. And on the flip side, they're accusing you of being over in the East, which is probably not true. You're just telling the truth about the state of things. So what, in your opinion, is the balance that Europe should be striking between China and the United States?
Well, I mean, the European Union was set up as an entity where all the different member states would work together in their own interest and in the interest of the unit. And we didn't really have so much a foreign policy, and we certainly had no great ambitions for military prowess at a European level. But that's all changed, because now we do. And the EU is being militarized at a mad pace. And it's not in the interest of the citizens of Europe. It's very much in the interest of the military-industrial complex, but it has nothing to offer the citizens of Europe, who want peace and have no interest in war. In relation to China, they're our biggest trading partner. They're a long piece from Europe. They are not a threat to our security, which the Americans like to tell us they are. The Americans say that China is a threat to their security, to the security of the people of America, the security of the people of Europe. Well, I don't find that to be true. I find China to be a threat to America's financial supremacy and the supremacy of the dollar, which is incredibly important to America, obviously. But the notion that China is a threat to their citizens is nonsense. China hasn't dropped a bomb on anyone in 40 years. They have one military base outside of China in the South China Sea, which happens to be in Djibouti. The Americans have over 750. And China has increased its defense spend. It's still about a third of the American, despite the fact that they have 4 times more people. And that they started from a very low base, given that they hardly had a military 20 years ago. But I think any neutral observer will agree that China's investment in military prowess is very much of a defensive nature, because it is worried about America sometime taking them on in a military way, and that would be a problem for them. But look, you asked me what sort of relationship Europe should have with America and with China. We should have good relations with both. We should be prepared to trade with both as long as it's in our interest. And listen, we haven't got time to get into a lot of the problems around trade anyway. I have serious problems with how a lot of trade has been done. I have serious problems with the neoliberal nature of much of how so many of these countries are run today. And I see big business being prioritized and their interests ahead of the ordinary people in most countries, and that's a problem. But Europe has a primary responsibility to take best care of its own citizens that most need our help, and we shouldn't be going down the militarization path, which we're doing at the moment. We shouldn't be promoting war. I actually think that it'll be a good day if we ever get rid of NATO, which I find problematic. NATO has nothing to offer peace-wise or security-wise. It's a war machine that serves the interest of the military-industrial complex and has always served the interest of US imperialism. I mean, it was formed in 1949, more or less, by the Americans in order to keep the Europeans in check and to make sure they weren't running off doing things that the Americans didn't want them to do, and that they behaved like good boys. Obviously, up until 91, when the resolution, when the Soviet Union was dissolved, up to that point, they could have argued that, well, really, they were just there to make sure that Europe was protected and whatever. But since then, given that the Soviet Union was gone, the threat from Russia had disappeared at that stage, you would like to think that NATO should have disappeared as well. But now NATO seems to be getting interested in Taiwan, in China, which is a long piece away from the borders of Europe and an awful long distance from the North Atlantic. And it is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is what NATO stands for. So it's very concerning that they have such ambition at the moment, which isn't helpful. Their role in Afghanistan, their role in Iraq, their role in Libya, their role in Yugoslavia has been a horror scene. And their role now in Ukraine is not helpful. And Stoltenberg, the boss of NATO, admitted one day when I was at committee, I was challenging him on stuff, and he admitted that he boasted about the fact that NATO had been in Ukraine since 2014. Well, what in God's name were NATO doing in Ukraine since 2014? Now, how can that be helpful? It's unfortunate, right? And to go back to your original question, how should we relate with both countries, China and the US? Europe should have an open-minded approach with both. It shouldn't be led by the nose by either of them. It shouldn't be taking orders from either of them. It should trade with them in a manner which best fits with the interests of the people of Europe.
Yeah. And we could all get along. We could all trade evenly instead of imposing what we want through military force, going back to the banana republics of, the 20th century. So going to Irish politics, because you're an Irish guy, you come from the Emerald Isle, which I love. What is the current states of Irish politics, and how does that fit into the kind of European political landscape?
Well, Ireland has always been very pro-EU, right? Pro-European Union. And I suppose that was a sort of a natural reaction to have been maybe too closely linked to Britain for so long. Most of our interaction was with Britain, and we always had a positive approach to Europe. We liked to go there on our holidays, and we had no good reason to dislike the Europeans. So there's always been a positive approach to it. But we were also pretty independent, and we liked our neutrality. And we did vote no to the Nice Treaty. We voted no to the Lisbon Treaty because both of them were eating into our independence and our neutrality. And now, obviously, we were made vote again on both of them because they didn't like the answer the first time. And they gave us more sweets so that we change our mind. And they used the mainstream media, obviously, to frighten us into voting the other way because they knew what was best for our health, and we didn't. We weren't clever enough to vote right the first time. So there is a healthy skepticism, despite the fact, despite our genuine likeness for you. We probably didn't want the idea of a super state where we would be told what to do from Brussels. But sadly, that's where we're going. And we have a leadership and a mainstream media that's very happy to promote that. And anyone that challenges it is demonized. Um, our, we got our independence from the Brits 102 years ago, and we've been ruled by a right-wing government every day since then. We've had either Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, or Labour. Three of them more or less behave the same. And Ireland is an amazing country, a wonderful people, a great country, but we're badly run and have been badly run for a long time. And I would say that we're seeing serious rises in inequality. I would say that half the people of Ireland today are having difficulties paying their bills at the end of the month. It doesn't change the fact that we're still a great country, but we're very unfairly organised and we're very unfairly run. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are in power at the moment together, and they're a bit of a horror scene, and it's beggars belief why the people have kept putting them back in, but the media have obviously played a very strong role in making sure that they do. About 2/3 of the people vote, and the third that don't vote are the poorest, who have become very cynical about politics, but that's true across much of the world. So the ones who really need the political apparatus to change are the ones who are not voting. And the mainstream media has a big influence on how the others vote. So we end up, despite the fact that the people are not predominantly right-wing in Ireland, but we end up with mostly right-wing politicians. But then the same is true of the European Union. I would say that the idea that the people of Europe are predominantly right-wing is not true. I would say they're about 50-50, but about 90% of the politicians are right-wing. With the crisis in Ukraine, myself and Claire Daly have twice put in an amendment at the plenary in Strasbourg when there was votes on resolutions condemning Russia for this, that, and the other, and we put in amendments which called on the European Union to maximise all opportunity to develop dialogue and diplomacy with a view to ending the war and bringing about peace. Almost 80% of the politicians voted against that. Now, that's worrying, right? I mean, I think the people who like war and promote it should be made fighting it. But I don't see any of these going along to fighting it, because the people dying in this war are the less privileged Ukrainians, and they're at this stage they're starting to look like collateral damage in a bigger project, and it's very unfortunate for Ukraine. Not only is the place being bombed back to the Stone Age, but a lot of innocent Ukrainians are dying for no good cause. But the Europeans would like to tell us that they're dying for our freedom, which is obviously nonsense. But we have an Irish government at the moment that has been a cheerleader for the war, and they are totally Atlanticist. We couldn't say enough nice things about Biden when he arrived for the 4 days, and we slavishly follow all diktat from the European Union. In fact, I can only remember two things where we stood up to Europe on over the years. Two things where we opposed them. One of them was when they offered us over 13 billion there was a tax concession which they were asking us to take to do with Apple. But we wouldn't take it, and we actually spent money fighting the case so that because we didn't want to take it. We didn't want to upset our American friends. And the only other thing where we really fought them on was corporation tax. We had one of the lowest in Europe at 12%, and the Europeans wanted us to put it higher, but we didn't want to, because we prefer to be nice to big business, even if it means that we don't have enough money then to provide the social services to our own people in a good manner.
Do you feel like neoliberalism is just kind of the diet fascism, or the diet, because it seems to be that they're pro-war, pro-business. They put profits over people. Calling them liberal is almost a misnomer.
Yeah, I mean, neoliberalism, as Noam Chomsky described a long time ago, was capitalism with the gloves off. And it's it's scary that so many of our governments now feel comfortable with implementing neoliberal policies that are clearly challenging the living conditions of most of their citizens. And you wonder, is there going to be a breaking point? How far can they go? How far can they push the people?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So you lived through some amazing times. You lived through the Troubles, I think it was called. You lived through when it came to your self-education about, imperialism and especially America being the biggest threat to world peace. When did you kind of start learning about this stuff? And when did you start saying, and what was it like joining the European Parliament, knowing that?
Well, when I first, I suppose, to put things in context, when I was 17, I went to New York to look for work, and I didn't have any permit or anything, right? I was illegal, but I couldn't get work there anyway. But then I went up to, I had very little money as well. But I went to Boston, and I eventually got work in a factory making Christmas decorations. It was a great crack, right? I think I was the only white fella on the floor I was on, and I was working with these black women. They were fucking brilliant. They were great crack. We had great times we had, and but anyway. Then my plan was to go down to South America, where I had an aunt who was a Franciscan nun, and she was working with the poor in the mountains outside La Paz. So that she was my father's sister. So I wanted to go see her and see what it was like down there. So I ended up anyway. Myself and this other guy that came over with me, he was my same age. We bought a car for $500 and we started driving it down. Now we had saved some money because we'd been working, right? But we reached Panama and the road ended. Right, the road stops. The Panama Highway,
the Darien Gap, yeah,
which has been paid for 3 times, I believe. Right, it was then, and still not there seemingly because the guys who run the boats carrying all the cars have made sure that it doesn't get built. But anyway, so we couldn't sell the car in Panama. I had to go back to Costa Rica, sold it for $200, and we had no money left, so we had 100 each. And we had to spend $60 getting the Cartagena on a plane, given that there was no road. And then we had 40 each, right? And then anyway, we split up then, and we actually didn't see each other for a long time. But anyway, I eventually got to La Paz. Had no money, but people were wonderful, and I was getting fed on a reasonable basis, right? And but when I was down there in La Paz, in Bolivia, I was in Bolivia in 73 and 74. So I was in Latin America when the Americans killed Allende. That's a long time ago, long before probably before you were born, right? So when I was there was a miners' strike. Banzer was the president, and he was a U.S. puppet, right? Banzer was the president at the time, and there was a miners' strike. And the miners' strike had gone on for a long time. I think they were getting $1 a day or something at the time. They were obviously being well paid anyway, right? And they were striking for more money. And while I was there, the American Rangers, who were a sort of a rapid action task force that the Americans had, and were based in Panama, they came down to Bolivia and they shot all the leaders of the miners' strike because it was undermining Banzer's authority and his ability to rule the country. And they shot 160 people. And it was reported in the local press, right? But I remember when I came home eventually, many months later, I discovered that it was never covered in the Western press, which I found amazing. But I suppose I seen a lot of things down there at the time, and I became very politicized, and I started to read up a lot more and try to understand what was happening in the world. And I suppose it was a bit of an eye-opener for me as to how things were really working. And so I've been very interested in how society has been organized everywhere ever since. And you asked me how I ended up in the European Parliament. Well, I mean, that's a real long story. But I was in construction all my life. I employed a few thousand people in my time. My business went wallop with the banking crisis in Ireland in 08, 09. I owned a lot of property at the time. I owned 76 properties when the crash came, but I lost everything. The bank.
Oh,
Well, I lost all the property, but I didn't lose my mind or my health. So I was actually okay, really. There's more things and more important things in life than property. But it was an amazing experience, obviously, at the time, and that's kind of still going on a bit. But I was dealing with 4 different banks, and they just kind of closed on their own assets and put things kind of into deep freeze for a little bit. One of them moved immediately. The other 3 kind of sat back for a bit. But they eventually all moved on their own assets that they had given loans out on and that kind of thing, right? And taken other stuff. But they didn't make me bankrupt because it was going to cost them too much money. Somebody else did that. And because I went into politics then in February 2011. I decided 16 days before the election that I'd throw my hat in the ring, and I announced it on national television because I used to be on TV a bit for different reasons. And so I said I'd run for election, and I did pretty well in the poll. I got elected handy. So I became a member of the Irish Parliament, right? That was in February 2011. But the guys who made me bankrupt were an American investment firm called Cerberus Capital. Nice gentlemen. And they were. I had done a lot of investigative work on property dealings in Ireland because I had come from that background. I'd been a builder all my life. I used to do my own development and all. I used to buy land, design it, and build it and sell it. So apartments and offices and whatever, a bit of everything. But when Ireland's banks ran into trouble, the government set up what was called a bad bank, and they called it NAMA, National Asset Management Agency. And it turned out that the NAMA turned out to be a total horror scene, and I reckon they cost the Irish state well over 20 billion, which is a lot of money for a little country like Ireland. But they were protected by the establishment, protected by the mainstream media as well, protected by the government. And but I exposed a lot of wrongdoing that went on in it, and the reason that I had access to it was mainly because developers and builders were coming to me because of my experience. I was the only one with a construction background experience in the Parliament at the time, so they were coming, and I was also independent, so I wasn't being dictated to by any party. So I was free to do as I wished. So I exposed a lot of wrongdoing. I got a lot of coverage early on, but eventually there was a media clampdown on it eventually because I was getting too close to the bone and I was exposing too much. But one of the things I exposed was the fact that Cerberus Capital paid a fixer's fee of 15 million sterling to get a loan portfolio called Project Eagle in Northern Ireland, because property in Northern Ireland, where fellas had links with banks, Irish banks, got caught up in the whole mess as well, and they were also went into the bad bank called NAMA. But anyway, Cerberus bought a loan portfolio called Project Eagle for a fraction of its value, paid a 15 million fixtures fee to get it, and I, with some help from some people, discovered that some of the money ended up in an Isle of Man bank account, and I exposed it in the Irish Parliament, and it became big news very quickly. The National Crime Agency in Britain initiated an investigation into it. Ireland, and eventually in 2017, this was in 2015 it was, right? It took a couple of years before the Irish government did anything, and but they've made sure that it's done nothing of a fruitful nature, and it still hasn't reported, even though it was set up in 2017. The Americans also investigated, and the Securities and Exchange in America initiated an investigation into it in 2015. But Cerberus helped to fund Trump's campaign, and the whole thing was quashed when Trump got elected. Now, the Securities and Exchange came before the European Parliament at one stage, and the head of it came in, and I got the opportunity to ask him questions, but he wouldn't answer my questions. But anyway, it was very interesting. But anyway, Cerberus said they'd sort me. and they did. And they managed to get hold of a property that was once mine, and there was a personal guarantee with it. So it was kind of just good fortune on their part that they managed to get this, and they used it as a way to come after me. So they bankrupted me, and they also bankrupted a football club that I had started. But they had promised that they would sort me, and that's what they did. And they spent a lot of money doing it. It cost them a lot of money because there was nothing in it for them. It cost them a lot of money. And the idea was to drive me out of politics, to damage me. But here I am, still alive.
And yeah, just your sheer likability is going to keep you where you need to be, speaking out for the working class people. But it seems like that when America's banks and these hedge fund kind of guys and private equity firms take these big risks, that the people that are going to end up, hurting the most after it falls apart is Europe or the other smaller baby brother countries of America. Do you feel like that's true?
Well, I mean, it's, as we started out talking about where Europe is going and the biggest challenges for Europe today. And I mean, look at it. America has dominated the world for almost 100 years financially, militarily. They've dropped more bombs than every other country put together every year since 1945. They've, by their own statistics, since 1990, they have intervened over 250 times in other countries since 1990 alone, and that's kind of scary as well. I mean, and the idea that Europe would attach itself to this like-minded partner, I would be very uncomfortable with that. I think Europe keeps talking about its values, European values. I mean, we are sick to the teeth of Europe talking about European values. Like everybody else, Europe has interest. Right? Everybody has interests, and I don't think any of us should be lecturing anyone else about values. We should all do the best we can for our own citizens, but we should sort of kind of drop the colonial approach and think that we're the only ones with the truth, we're the only ones with the wisdom, we're the only ones with real values, because that's where, sadly, we still are, and that's problematic. And we are attaching ourselves in a very strong way, more and more, with the American project. Meanwhile, we're watching the game change because China is going to be the number one player in my lifetime. I don't know how long more it's going to take, but I don't think we can compete with them. And I think that Europe should be staying friends with everybody, including the Chinese. And I think in the interest of peace in the world and harmony, I think we should start saying no to US imperialism. We should start saying no to the military-industrial complex ambitions. We should say no to America's wars. We've had enough of them.
Yeah, and it looks like China is able to bring, billions out of poverty without dropping a bomb, without invading a country, cutting edge technology, incredible manufacturing, doing it all without that imperialist, colonialist mentality. And I agree with you. So looking ahead, what do you hope to achieve in Parliament? And also just in your personal life, do you have anything that you're looking forward to doing? Going to pet a kangaroo? I don't know. What's on your bucket list?
I literally do just enjoy every day, no matter how much hardship I might get. I look forward to cooking in the evening. I look forward to having a decent bottle of wine with my food. I also enjoy good beer, but most of all, I enjoy good company. And I try and make that happen each day. No great long-term plans. In terms of ambition in the parliament, listen, politics is tough in some ways because it's hard to make progress, right? I used to build walls, houses, and I used to put on roofs. I could tie steel. I could do most things. I can kind of build a house from start to finish, except the electrical, plumbing, and plastering. I can do everything else on a house. And you go in and you start at 7 in the morning, and we used to work till 6 or 7 in the evening. And you could look back and you'd see what you'd done all day. And there was a lovely feeling of satisfaction as you went to the pub for a couple of pints before you went home and got something decent to eat, right? Well, in politics, it takes a long time to change things. And look at myself and Claire Daly work very closely together in the Parliament. We would be of a different political persuasion to most of them. We're very much probably plowing a lone furrow on a lot of our stuff. But it doesn't deter us from saying what we think is right. We try to use the platform as well as we can. Now, the European Parliament is a bit of a talk shop, like most parliaments. Democracy is a bit overrated in many ways. I don't think people really understand what it is, and just having a vote every 5 years isn't really my idea of democracy. My idea of democracy, it would be where the people actually have a say in how their society has been organised and how their country's been run, and we don't really see much evidence of that anywhere. But in the European Parliament, we have three institutions. We have the Council, we have the Commission, and we have the Parliament itself. And the Parliament itself are the only ones that are directly elected. But we're the ones with the least power, and we can't initiate legislation. The Commission does that. So the Commission are not elected by the people. It's a bit of a gerrymandering job among the groups. The council hold their meetings in secret, and they're made up of the people coming from the different member states. So there's not much very democratic about holding the meetings in secret. So the one body that's actually directly elected by the people, has the least power. But having said that, it is good to get your opportunity to talk. I love to stand up and have my say and give it socks. And both myself and Claire Daly probably speak more often than anybody else in this place. I haven't seen the statistics of late, but we're in the top few, and we love having our say. And we use the platform as well as we can to get our message out. We don't have the benefit of mainstream media to do that, so we have to use social media. While it's not perfect, it's the best that we've got available to us, and we do that as well as we can. We're being demonized because while we're not, we haven't taken Russia's side at all in the war. We've criticized and condemned the invasion from day one, but because we're looking for peace, we're described as Putin puppets. Even though we are not taking sides, we want peace. We're anti-war, and we don't understand the logic of the European position at the moment. We find it totally stupid, and we're challenging that morning, noon, and night, and we're demonized for doing that. But it doesn't stop us. We've never seen a government that we liked anywhere. We're not puppets of any government. We're not getting paid by any of them. If they are paying me, they're putting it into the wrong bank account, and because I haven't seen any evidence of it. But we will call it as we see it, as we see fit, morning, noon, and night, whether people like it or not. And we are getting support all across Europe and all across the world for being a voice for peace. And there's a strong element of satisfaction in that.
Yeah. As somebody who's living in Germany, but originally from America, everything that you say rings very true to me. And we're so grateful what you do and the passion that you give in when you talk in the European Parliament. People should go right now and go check that out. It is incredibly passionate and real. And I never saw a politician that had what they call cojones to stand up against this, broken system that only panders to a certain class of people and leaves everybody else hung out to dry. So we appreciate you.
Yeah, and just in terms of the future, I should have mentioned the fact that I have 4 kids and I have 2 grandchildren, and I try to organize my life around my kids because nothing else means as much.
Grandpa Mick. That's so nice.
Yeah.
Well, we want to thank you for coming. You're going to come back and you're going to do it again. And if I'm ever in your neighborhood, I'm going to bring a nice bottle of wine or maybe some Bushmills, and we'll have us a nice meal.
Right. And make sure, if you're going to bring wine to my place, right, single grape, no wood.
Let me write that down. Single grape, no wood.
No wood.
Okay. Wood. I'll find
nice and simple. And no chemicals, please.
Oh, of course. I'm right there with you. My wife is working in organic agriculture. We are on board with the ecosystem. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, we'll sign off to everybody out here. We'll chat briefly after. Thanks for coming, everybody. Mick Wallace. Check him out. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.